So, guess what, guys? The government shutdown's over. You now have access to the FCC. Just kidding, the FCC's not open yet. Why would they make life that simple? But we're well on the way there. So let's break down exactly what happened. So I've been watching the FCC website probably every day for the past few weeks, or I think it's been a little over a month since the government was shut down, to see if they had any future developments. And lo and behold, today, on the 17th of November, in the year of our Lord 2025, there is a new public notice, which I'll put up on the screen here for you, that says revisions to the deadlines following resumption of normal operations. So let's back up a little bit. As you know, the FCC was a victim of this government shutdown. And what happened was that radio amateurs and other personal licensees could not have filed any amateur radio licenses or GMRS licenses or any FCC licenses for that matter. However, people were wondering if their license is still valid. So the good news is, if your license didn't expire, your license was valid. You couldn't officially verify it in the FCC database, but your license was 100% valid. So don't worry about that. If your license was renewed, like if you start a renewal process and then finish before the government shutdown, your license was still valid too, because the FCC's license process is that if you start the process and they're still processing, as long as you start that process before the deadline of expiration, your license is valid. Now, where it gets a little tricky is if your license expired after the shutdown. Now, if it expired after the shutdown, theoretically, you had no operating privileges. I mean, yo-ho-ho in a bottle of rum, you were a pirate, right? If you operated, but oh well, I mean, nobody's going to enforce that, really. I mean, they're not going to send anybody to your house. Maybe they are, but, But regardless, you had no permission to operate. Apparently, at least in my opinion, right? This is not legal advice, but from my point of view, you had no permission to operate. However, they did clarify in this public notice today that they've extended some deadlines. So they even specifically mentioned personal licensees. They said, essentially, so they started out saying all ULS applications and notifications originally due to be filed in accordance with the Commission's rules on October 1, 2025 through and including December 5, 2025 are now due on December 5, 2025. And they put in brackets here, except certain personal radio services renewals as described below. And for personal radio licensees, i.e. amateur, ship, aircraft, GMRS, and commercial operator licenses, renewal filings originally due on October 1, 2025 through and including March 5, 2026 are now due on March 5, 2026. Further, we confirmed that licensees whose licenses have expired and whose renewal filing deadlines have been extended above may rely on their timely renewal filing by the extended deadline to support continued operation pursuant to Section 1.62 of the Commission's rules. So the way I read this in my layperson's terms is that if your license expired, you had no permission to operate. However, when the FCC reopens, you can file, right? You can file a license renewal, and then you're essentially in the good graces of the FCC, and your license will be valid. You'll have your license privileges until it expired. But, I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody like maybe Michelle Bradley might come along and correct me on this. But it says that how we confirm that licensees whose license has expired, so they acknowledge that the license expired, and whose renewal filing to support continued operation pursuant to section 1.62 are, have been extended, may rely on their timely renewal filings. So you're going to renew your license, and then you're going to have the ability to operate. Now, here comes the practical advice. When the FCC reopens, because they're going to reopen sometime probably this week, and we're in the middle of November, the first thing you should do is check the license validity. If you have a license that expired, file a renewal, and then once you file that renewal, you could operate at least according to this document. Once you file that renewal, and once you're granted renewal, it seems to me that how it probably wouldn't process right away because of the backlog and all this stuff. But file this renewal, and then you'll be in the queue, and then you'll have privileges until they either grant or deny, or until something happens. And the government is probably going to shut down in January again, if I'm being honest. But in any case, file it. So this is Rhea here at the edit desk, and I just realized that all you people who took exams, you didn't know what to do. But I did mention in the last video that you go on the FCC website and register with your FRN. You get a brand new FCC registration number, and you will be required to supply that to the VE team or the VEC that took your license application. So they're not going to be able to file an FRN for you. You have to get that on your own. And once you get that on your own, you can go ahead, give that to them, and they will batch file that with the FCC to get your new license. If you had an upgrade or other transaction where you already had an FRN, you don't need to do anything. They're just going to batch file that when the FCC opens. Okay? Let's go again. In addition, make sure your email address is current with the FCC. The FCC is doing everything electronic via email now, and you want to make sure that you have a valid email address with the FCC so that you can get all of the notices from them, including they will send you a link to your license authorization, which is essentially well, it's not paper anymore, but the PDF of your license that you can use as proof that you have an amateur radio license or a GMRS license. Remember that your license is no more than a record in the FCC database. And if you are, if you need proof of that, you need a printout of your authorization or, proof of that. So make sure you get that. But once the FCC comes back up, even if you didn't just renew your license, go online to the FCC ULS, fcc.gov/ULS, log in to your license manager, download a copy of your authorization, keep a copy on physical media and in a cloud location, such as maybe a Google Drive or a Dropbox or something like that, and keep it in there. Also, maybe keep a copy on a flash drive or a CD-ROM. Who still uses that? I still archive to optical disc, by the way. But keep a copy on there. And it would not be a bad idea to print a copy on paper, sign it, and keep it with your rest of your station papers. As I mentioned on the radio show this week, you're supposed to have papers for your radio station, right? You're supposed to have that RF exposure evaluation, which everybody's supposed to be doing. I'm sure a lot of people didn't do, but you have that, and you have the copy of your license. And, maybe also if you operate 630 and 2200 meters, you have a copy of that particular authorization and such. I personally keep a copy of my license on a plastic card that I got from my friend Chad at njlibertycards.com. he will print it out for you. You can tell him I sent you, and but he's quite reasonable. He will send you a copy of this very quickly, printed on plastic. Okay, the little wallet size one that they have in the FCC printout. But yeah, the FCC doesn't send any licenses via paper anymore. They phase that out. They used to send on a nice security paper, but then they changed the copy paper, and then they said, you know what? Electronic licenses on PDF is good enough. So, other things to do, make sure your current address is updated with the FCC. If you change your name, you got married or something, and your name changed, make sure that's updated with the FCC. They need to be able to contact you in case there's anything they need to deal with in your station. So, well, let's hope this is going on. And I say keep a copy of your license, because the current deal to reopen the government lasts until January. They have something called a continuing resolution, which is a short-term spending bill that basically says continue all of the government authorization to spend money at the current levels until January. They slipped in a few things there too, but essentially it's just spend at the same levels until January, and then hopefully the government will pass a permanent, well, not a permanent, but a full authorization for the year at that time. All right. Okay. Well, I hope this was helpful. If you like it, you can like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace and 73.